So I am Bon Pugh. I'm based in Philadelphia. I am a practicing emergency medicine physician and assistant dean for health and design. And I want to introduce my colleagues, David and Matt.
So my name is David Janka. I work and teach over at the Stanford D School, so across campus. I went here for medical school. Right when this building started construction is when I finished, so I never got to learn here, so it's great to teach here. And I work at the interface of healthcare and design, so whether that's with hospitals or medical schools, but how can we bring design methods and mindsets into healthcare?
Yeah, and my name's Matt Trowbridge. I'm a physician as well at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. And I have my own I'm primarily a public health researcher at this point, but several years ago I became very interested in, I became aware that I approach problems in a very different way than a lot of my clinical colleagues and my other physician colleagues, and I found design thinking as a really interesting pedagogy. And now, like these guys, over the last couple years at UVA, I've been exploring how to start design thinking as a thing inside a more traditional school. So I'll be talking about that a bit as well.
Great. All right. So let's jump in. Like Bon said, we have about 90 minutes together. We're going to do a mix of you listening and hearing some things, some examples, and then working in a team on some questions. So it's not going to be 90 minutes of us talking at you. To kind of start and orient everyone, this session is about design thinking. Design thinking is a methodology, an approach, a tool amongst many other tools that are useful in a variety of industries. It's not the messiah, it's not a silver bullet, so just so you know. It's great for a lot of questions, but we still need clinical research for a lot of questions as well, so it's not going to solve all your problems. You've maybe seen this before, maybe just show of hands who's seen this image before, these hexagons. Yes, it's pretty popular. So this is one way of visualizing design thinking as a process. So one way, a process. So going through step by step, beginning with empathizing, so understanding the people that you are serving and designing for, immersing yourself and your design team in those experiences, observing people and contexts and environments, so understanding problems and opportunities. That's what we think about with empathizing. Defining is where you synthesize this information, you make some sense out of it, you choose to focus on a particular issue or opportunity, and you make some choices because you can't solve everything simultaneously. The next step, ideating. So this is where you're generating potential solutions, trying to get diverse options, challenge the status quo, really think about novel ways of solving or approaching the problems that you've defined or focused on. This notion of prototyping, where you're taking ideas out of your head or off of a whiteboard and making them physical in some way, whether it's for a physical solution, a product, or a service, or an experience, or an app, or an event, making it real in a low-resolution way to begin to play with that and generate feedback. And that feedback is the kind of final stage or the final step of design thinking. So testing, evaluating, bringing the ideas back to your users, and using that information to iterate. So design thinking is not really a linear process where you check your 5 boxes and then at the end you drive up to Sand Hill Road and get your $1 million seed fund. It's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that, so we like to kind of show this, that sometimes going through a cycle means that you start over. It's not unidirectional. Sometimes you go a few steps forward and you realize you need to go a step back. So there's a lot more fluidity to design thinking than one of these manifestations. There are many different ways to manifest a design thinking process. So instead of hexagons here, we have these like undulating lines. This is from SAP. They have a slightly different model, look, think, and do. Again, there's lots of different processes. Design thinking sits in an ecosystem of lean methodology and agile, so there's lots of stuff going on here. It is also very useful, and from the D School perspective, sometimes more important, to not get stuck in thinking of design thinking as a process with these steps. So another way to think about design thinking is from the perspective of mindsets, so attitudes, ways of behaving. This is a little bit of the secret sauce or the hidden agenda we have at the D School when we teach our students, is we want them to start to think and act in this way. So focusing on human values in general, thinking about meaning and value and belief in their work. Show, don't tell, so making things physical and interactive rather than report-based or based on explanations. Can you demonstrate something? Embracing experimentation, so trying new things, not just when you're prototyping, but throughout that process, and not just when you're working on a challenge, but in the ways that you're interacting with people. Being mindful of process. If you are using a process, acknowledging it, where you are, what you're doing, what tools you're using, what that feels like. Crafting clarity. If you've seen the way designers work, there's lots of artifacts. It can sometimes look like a mess. You've got to make sense out of that. You've got to be a good storyteller when you work in this way as well. Radical collaboration. Again, you're not always working on a challenge, but sometimes you want to just bring in different perspectives. How are you collaborating with different types of people? And then this notion of a bias toward action. It's really easy, especially in science and medicine, especially in a place like Stanford or a medical school setting, to have people that were rewarded their whole lives for being analytical and having the right answer. And that's a good thing. We want people to have the right answer. But there are lots of things where there's not one right answer. And so rather than getting stuck in analyzing and reading papers, how can you get people to act more quickly? And then finally, so we talked about design thinking as a process, design thinking as a mindset. This is a new way that we're framing the kind of designerly abilities at the D School. There's a blog post about this you can find on our website. And these, again, are maybe even more abstract than some of those process steps. But these are the types of abilities that we find successful designers have, people who work and collaborate with designers. So navigating ambiguity, learning from others, synthesizing information. Again, this notion of experimenting quickly, experiment rapidly, moving between concrete ideas and abstract ideas, building and crafting intentionally. What are you making and why? Communicating deliberately, and then actually designing your design work. And if you notice, as we're getting into this abstract space, some of these principles or abilities then even start to align with what we would hope would be the core competencies of successful modern medical students, what we hope that they could do. And even though these might make sense because they're simple words, it's like, how do you actually do this in an educational setting, and how do you do that in a medical school setting? And that is the frontier that we are at today, and the motivation behind this session. So the first thing that you're going to be doing at your table with your Post-it notes and Sharpies is you're going to have a quick rapid-fire conversation. We're going to unpack a little bit from your perspectives and experiences, your response to our first question, and then we'll hear from the room what's on the minds of all of you. We are benefiting from the intellectual capacity of this room as much as we are sharing our experiences with you. So there's enough, I think, materials for everyone to have a Sharpie. For Post-it notes, there's 4 to a table, so if you want to even just like rip a stack in half, just so everyone has them. Okay, so one second. So I'm going to put up the first question. You're going to have about 5 minutes, and what I want you to do is rapidly headline on your Post-it notes answers to this question. So don't spend too much time debating, because you have different perspectives and experiences. But just try to get out several of them really quickly. Okay, so the first thing I want you to talk about is, why does healthcare need design thinking? In some ways, when you come to a conference like this or a session like this, that's almost like an assumption. But I wanted you to talk about in your tables, what do you think is important about design or design thinking, or why do you think it is valuable to healthcare in general? So you can step outside of medical education and training first-year medical students and think about, why is this even relevant from your perspective? All right, 5 minutes, go. Okay, so sorry that was confusing. So in your team, you're trying to generate several responses to this question. So you're going to be headlining them on Post-it notes. So if like 3 people agree on something, make sure one person actually writes it down. Afterwards, we're going to be collecting some of them. So you want it to be in a bite-sized form for us to pick up. Okay? All right, get started.
If there's a skeptic in the room, feel free to speak out as well. Do we need it? Is a real actual why or do? That's my point. From my point of view, if you're skeptical, like say that too. But if you also feel like both sides, get them out there. What are your thoughts?
Everybody says I didn't word it that way. So why collaborative? We have to change. It's always the way.
How we think about how adults learn. We fail, we learn from mistakes.
Of a way for an individual to get that.
Exactly. And the cluster. There's
So the question is why wrapping
Okay, did you miss?
No, I didn't miss that situation. I'm just, I don't know why I didn't get it.
Okay.
So what I would say, so like in enough time is maybe just listen on your CS. That's what I was saying.
And then we'll unpack this more because we know that people are at different stages. So
Is it always about cost? Like the model of how to like break down the process of finding like the how to transmit yes.
I think it's not only just the speed of that, I think that's where we say is that, and how do we work rapidly? Well, when I think about drug schools, not one section from the evidence
The creative problem.
is this yours? It is. I mean, that's what I want.
Take about 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Excellent.
They want to know what do I do.
I'm Erin. What they talked about in the last session, precision would be a good line that we could use too.
All right.
You're taking a whole function and how to go through all these design
It could be one word.
All right, 30 seconds to get out your last thought. 30 more seconds. All right, everyone, you can pause. You can pause. So I get everyone's attention. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire share out. So what this is going to look like is, you know, someone from your team raising a hand with a Post-it note that you're then going to read out, and I'm going to collect and put at the front of the room. There are likely some common themes or ideas that you have, so we're going for variety and breadth. So if you've already heard one of your ideas come out, go for another one. So if you want to, whoever wants to start, we're just going to headline. Okay, yes, sir.
Inclusivity.
Inclusivity. Okay. All right. Next.
Learn from mistakes.
What's that?
Learn from mistakes.
Learn from mistakes. Okay. Yes.
We're dinosaurs. We're pretty slow to adapt.
Slow to adapt. Okay.
Cost-effective solutions.
All right.
Cost-effective solution. All right.
I was thinking building comfort with failure.
Building comfort with failure. Wonderful.
Human-centered.
Human-centered. Okay.
I think this goes with it. Understand each other.
Understanding each other.
Do what you can influence.
Do what you can influence.
Focus on desirability.
Focus on desirability. Okay.
Slow pace of change.
Slow pace of change. In healthcare.
Flattening hierarchies.
Flattening hierarchies. Yeah.
The sheer enormity of the challenge in like all the other areas of society it touches.
Absolutely.
The enormity of the challenge.
So like you mean like interwoven with
So much else involved. Yeah.
Focus on solution rather than barrier.
focus on solutions rather than barriers.
It seems fun.
That's good. Yes.
Bringing disparate views to one table.
Bringing disparate views to one table.
Coordinating between all the moving parts.
Coordinating between all the moving parts. Okay.
This kind of goes with that, to address the spaces in between all the stakeholders.
Address the spaces between the stakeholders. And are there like secret stakeholders actually there? Yes.
Identifying a problem that you didn't know.
Identify a problem you didn't know existed.
Work with constraints.
Work with
within constraints.
Oh yeah,
perfect.
Working within constraints, great.
Might be the only way to break the traditional models, antiquated rules.
To break traditional models. Let's get a few more from over this side. What haven't you heard yet?
Collaborative problem solving.
Collaborative problem solving. Wonderful.
Rapid pace of change.
Rapid pace of change. Anything else?
I know.
Making healthcare practitioners innovative.
Making healthcare practitioners innovative. Okay.
Getting away from no's. Let's talk about.
Getting away from no's.
They
Okay.
talk about.
Yes. I think that's right.
Start where you are.
We can have everyone be quiet while you're not announcing your post-it note, just so we can hear. Start where you are.
It could be a different way to interact with patients.
A different way to interact with patients. Wonderful.
We tend to be generally inefficient about a lot of different things.
And so
Cost and
inefficiencies, okay.
Non-sexy but effective ideas that often get overlooked. Sorry.
Oh, interesting, okay. Anything else you haven't heard yet?
I said to find new ways to solve old problems and achieve better outcomes.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we'll leave this list up here, so feel free to snap a picture of it. One of the things we even observed and somewhat anticipated from this room is we have a lot of different people with different perspectives and different experiences and different knowledge of design and maybe some opportunity to have experimented with it. And so acknowledging that diversity, we wanted to start here as kind of a level-setting moment. Some of you have a very specific perspective on how design thinking might benefit healthcare, why it's even relevant in medicine. And I could see that even with some of the language that was used. I was like, oh yeah, those are like the right buzzwords. You've heard that before. Other people had very interesting specific ideas. We had other people that were even kind of wondering like, well, what is design or what are we talking about here? So I think this is a good microcosm of where all the different medical schools are right now. Some institutional knowledge exists at some places, and other places it's a complete, no man's land of design and design thinking. Or it might feel that way, it isn't actually that way. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Bon, and he's going to talk about his experiences and experiments at Jefferson. And then after that, we'll have another similar question. Okay?
Great. All right. So this was my answer to the just a session that we had. I am been on faculty at Jefferson University, which is one of the oldest medical schools in the country. One of the largest. We have more alumni than any other med school in the country. And when I think about the problems in healthcare, I think one of the post-its from your section there was the system is broken. And that's what I feel, that our healthcare system is broken, and how do we move the needle? And so there's a lot of ways that we're seeing now with payment reform, bundle payments, and I like to think long term. I think to move the needle for me as an educator and a dean at a medical school is we need to fix how we train future doctors. And so that's a lot of what my work is concentrated on. And this guy, Dr. Samuel Gross, was a surgeon at the medical school where I'm at. This is Gross Clinic. And so this is actually one of the old lecture halls at my very own medical school. And fast forward to today, and it's the same sort of pedagogy that happens where we put the students in large lecture halls, and it's a master educator transmitting knowledge. But despite all the years that I underwent training, and some of the years, I imagine a lot of us are clinicians here, underwent training, that we still feel like we're kind of lacking when we're approaching healthcare problems. And so this is where I work. This is a trauma bay in our emergency department. And after working several years here, I got kind of burned out as a physician, where a lot of the public health problems were showing up at my doorstep. And so like Clay Christensen said this morning, I spent days learning the Krebs cycle, which I never needed to practice or bring up as working on shift in the emergency department. But stuff like homelessness and the opioid crisis, I was like, this is stuff I'm dealing with every day, and have no idea how to approach these problems. So that it was frustrating to me that I did not have this toolkit, and I got a sense of like we as physicians aren't good at handling complexity and ambiguity. So I had this hunch that maybe this thing called design thinking we can implement that in our medical curriculum, and maybe this will help us to become creative problem solvers in medicine. Only thing is I have no idea what design thinking was. I'm not trained as a designer. I studied classics in college. I did 4 years of residency, a year of fellowship. I did a public policy degree. But I had this opportunity 3 years ago to start this program. It was the first design thinking program within a medical school because our dean really wanted to rethink of how we wanted to do med ed. So I did what everyone else does when they need help. I just started cold calling, emailing people. And 3 years ago, I was like, I found this guy, David Janka. He's at Stanford. He went to medical school. He's like an instructor at the D school. So I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Want to come by and help me out? So David.
I said Philadelphia in February. It sounds wonderful.
So this was like 6 in the morning. I'm kind of stressed out because I have to present to the curriculum committee. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So David came. He ran a great boot camp for our students, and we had him back for our 3rd boot camp. So he's been doing this for 3 years for us. And what's exciting, our program started out as a co-curricular program, so we have a subset of about 20 students who opt into it, and they still have to go through the traditional medical school curriculum, but this year we're having a major redesign of our curriculum. Like, we're seeing that in a lot of medical schools right now. So we have this thing called scholarly inquiry, which spans the 4 years, and so we have different tracks of that. So our design track is actually part of that scholarly inquiry, so it's becoming embedded in our traditional curriculum, which is pretty cool. I never thought ever that students had to take design. So it's not all the medical students, but it's a subset of our students. So they get to choose from other things like pop health or clinical translational research or policy. So we get them in our first year of medical school, and we follow them through year 4. And David also said, you should just go on Twitter and just start tweeting. And I was like, man, I started a Twitter account years ago, and I was like, okay, well, why don't we just start this? And so I started doing that, and then started reading up a lot on design thinking, trying to meet up with people, and a lot of people in this room I think I had met through Twitter. So Dennis Boyle was a partner at IDEO. I love this quote that he has about prototyping, and I said, and then he started like following me, and we started like interacting together. And then it brought me to, actually, I went to IDEO, which is right down the block, and did some design workshops there. I've had a lot of visits to the D school. Matt and I were there yesterday. David gave us a tour of his spaces that look a lot different from those traditional medical school spaces that I trained in. It was inspiring. And it doesn't show up, but these things here are the prototypes of the original Apple mouse that Dennis created, and just kind of learning the importance of prototyping in design thinking. So we have a limited budget, and I did not have a large budget to begin with. It was actually really small when I started this program. And so I'm not at Stanford, in this beautiful space here, or at Dell Medical School with this infusion of money. And we did not have these type of spaces that existed here. So what I did was I just begged, borrowed, and steal. So this is a art school right down the block from us, University of the Arts. And Jeremy is a professor there, and I said, I had coffee. I was like, hey, can you help me do this? And he said, yeah. And I was like, well, can we meet in your space too? And we just like co-opted his space. And a lot, like, you don't need a huge budget to start this, right? So David was saying those red towers right there, so the D school started in trailers right behind those red towers.
Yeah, first location of the D school was a double wide trailer on a part of campus no one wanted to be in. So.
Yeah. So
small.
And it was still challenging though, like explaining to the other deans, the other faculty, why are we going to be teaching design thinking in medical school? So how I frame our curriculum is I take real healthcare problems and frame them as design challenges. Because what happens a lot of these healthcare problems, it's like kind of changing the mindset, right? Like here, this is my emergency room, overcrowding. You know, we have a guy who I think is homeless and he's intoxicated, he's in a C-collar. First of all, he shouldn't be in C-collar lying down like that. He shouldn't be in the hallway. And so we just give up. We're just like, oh, this sucks, whatever, we're just gonna deal with this. But this process has really kind of changed our mindsets of like, well, here's an opportunity. You know, how would we even go about trying to change this? So I'm going to give a few quick examples. David, how am I doing?
You said like 10 minutes.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm talking fast. So some examples of how we run our program. So one challenge was this is our internal waiting room. It's a awful space, but it's still even though it's an awful space, how do we improve that patient experience, right? That they're like in this tight space looking at each other. So we just started moving around chairs and made the best out of not a great situation. So that was one exercise that we did. Another exercise of kind of implementing design principles. This is kind of idea towards bias towards action that David had mentioned, and we did this. The space in our emergency room is really crowded, so I wanted to study how the space impacts behavior and communication. So I linked up with a local architecture firm called Karen Timberlake that has a really strong, robust design research division. And one of the partners there, Billy, studies this. I said, hey, do you want to work with me and some medical students on a summer project on studying healthcare spaces and mapping them? She's like, sure. So we did something crazy. We actually entered this without having a hypothesis, which is weird as an academic researcher not to have a hypothesis. And we just started doing observations. So this is a floor plate of the emergency department. And we just started seeing how the different stakeholders, where they were and their behaviors. And then that developed, we thought that this is cool. We're getting a lot of robust data. And we turned this 2 months later into this, which is an iPad-based digital mapping tool that uses GIS. And 6 months later, we applied for a grant looking at communication behaviors in the emergency department and how space impacts how nurses communicate with providers and patients. So it was fascinating kind of incorporating what I was teaching in our design thinking classes to my research and how that really accelerated this process. What we try to do is engage with the end users of healthcare. And so, you know, we had this opportunity to work with Larique Bird, and this was a class that we ran with our second year students, right, Rob? Yeah. They were second years. Yeah, second year students. Larique is from a part of Philadelphia that is very violent. He was shot at age 16 right outside his doorstep. And we wanted to kind of change the mindset of our students of how they can learn by interacting with Larique and creating adaptive devices for him. So this was a great process for us to learn about iteration and working with the patient and getting his thoughts on what he needed. Another research program, or this was a research project we did in the summer with first-year medical students looking at medication reconciliation. And it's a frustrating process, right? A lot of times patients, if it's great, they bring in this. Usually they bring in their pill bottles or say, hey, I take this red pill like 2 times a day, and I think it's for my blood pressure. So how do we translate, how do we obtain this history and in an accurate way? So that was our challenge for the summer. So we started off, I don't know how to code, none of our students know how to code, but they wanted to make an app, and so this is like just a schematic, a prototype of what an app might be, and then we linked up with a local design firm who wanted to work with us, and we don't have the budget, so we're like, hey, you want to just partner with us? They're like, sure. And so we partnered with them, and they put these beautiful screen flows of that initial prototype of an app. And this was all done with a budget of 0. So our final, so Mark is a second-year student, so we apply these principles of rapid prototyping and iteration and a bias towards action to medical device development. So here's a program that was funded through our provost office on rapid medical device development. So we had a brainstorming session, kind of like what we're doing now, on new types of medical devices. So Mark was part of a team that were whiteboarding a solution to help patients in the hospital sleep better at night. And 6 months later, they formed a company, were able to file for provisional patents. We just found out they got $25,000 for an accelerator program within our makerspace here. And this was applying these kind of principles that they had learned in medical school towards rapid medical device development. And so this is their website. And so it was really kind of for them, none of them are engineers, they were just inspired by this new type of thinking and how it accelerated the innovation process. These guys are here. You guys want to raise your hands? Yeah, so there was a AMA challenge on redesigning medical education, and what I love is these guys and my students who talked about this new type of curriculum applied. There was 147 teams, and so they took the top 2 prizes. So this to me says, there is a need for this type of thinking in our traditional medical school. Right? So I think this process is, I would argue, more important than organic chemistry in terms of kind of the work that we do as clinicians. And so we're not trying to make clinicians into innovators or work in startups, but I think it's an important tool for them to become better physicians.
All right. So, back. That's okay. You're gonna see in a second. All right. So you've now heard from Bon. We've heard a couple examples of both experiments that they've run. You've heard some of the nitty-gritty of who he had to talk to or what he had to do for free. So the next question that we're going to have you talk about in your group is about more of the logistics, whether that is physical logistics or cultural logistics of bringing something like design thinking specifically into medical education. So for those of you in the room that are in medical education or went to medical school, take that perspective. For those of you that are not, take the perspective maybe as what you think is happening and use that as a conversation starter, or what you see maybe going into hospital settings. But your next question here is to think specifically about the barriers. So what is right now blocking something like design thinking or a more innovative, creative culture and approach? What is blocking that in medical schools today? And you can be as specific as a number of hours, or as broad as an approach or a mindset. But similar to last time, take 5 minutes, have a conversation, and put your ideas on post-its.
So you might see me as a patient, but I also have marketing instincts, or I might be an architect, or maybe I build apps. You don't go beyond representatives. I know
normally we have big ideas to help out. I don't know how to chair or everybody gets that's a big barrier.
The same thing. The guy up here is the expert in all of us.
I think it was like within and Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, that's not really a priority in my mind. Right.
And so first, it's still voluntary, right? So like with these guys, this is a practice. Yeah, those are interesting phenomenon. Not my dog. My stomach doesn't understand. But I teach my son to call his doctor about something that you yesterday. It's not hierarchical now. If you're 7 years, she's 3. So call her doctor. Meanwhile, I'm sort of thinking, she's not better than you. She's just different. You're actually taking care of it's funny, like if I'm a fucking doctor, then you should call me and then everybody calls
we can make a double That means that ain't nobody got time for that. Or like the feeling of like being swallowed. It's just a matter of
Two more minutes.
it's just a matter of
It's not like this. You will have type of information harder with other methods as well, or is there a deadline status?
Yeah, I can do this on that's what I was thinking. You can tell he was so focused on I get everyone pause our conversations. Okay. Now we're going to do similar to last time, where we want to hear from all the groups and start to collect some of the thoughts that you had. So similar, hold up your post-it note, wait for me to call on you, and read it out, and then Matt or Bon will collect them. One thing that we're going to add this time is if you hear something that your table also talked about, do this. This is like, I think the D school learned this from like the kindergarten classroom. So, just kind of go like this. Don't wait. And so just to keep the distinction, it's not for something that you necessarily like also agree with. I want to just know, like, did your table also talk about that specific thing? Just so we can start to get an idea of what is in common, or maybe what some of the more like outlier responses are. So there'll probably be a lot of this at the beginning, but why don't we just start? Yeah. Fear. Fear. Okay. So just to remind you, just to keep this going, this is like a great group. I wish we had 3 more hours with you, because I feel like we're just like wandering. But try to just stay quiet so we can hear the next one and keep things moving. So yes. Time. Okay. Raise high when you're ready.
Daring.
Yes.
Daring to make changes.
Daring to make changes.
Ego.
Ego.
Curriculum overload.
Curriculum overload. Yes.
Lack of respect for the humanities.
Lack of respect for the humanities.
Buy-in from stakeholders.
The design industry itself.
The design industry itself, okay. And then back here?
Buy-in from stakeholders.
Buy-in from stakeholders, okay. Yes.
Lack of role models or subject matter experts.
Ah. Yes.
Preconceived notions.
Say it loudly. Preconceived notions. Yes.
Willingness to go out of one's comfort zone.
Willingness to go, yeah. Without telling nicely with the fear.
Flexible leadership.
Flexible leadership or inflexible leadership?
Inflexible.
Inflexible leadership. Yes.
Physical space.
Physical space, okay. Yes.
Traditional mindset.
Traditional mindset.
Sense that it's a fad that's not going to stick around.
Ah, interesting. It's a fad, yeah. Yes.
Getting somebody to tell you there's no budget when maybe you don't need a budget.
So like financial
Like
tension.
feeling you need money when maybe you don't need it.
Oh, I see. Okay. The perception that everything requires a budget.
Our current methods of assessing students.
Ah, methods of assessment.
Committee thinking.
Committee thinking. Interesting. Yes.
No incentives to innovate.
No incentives to innovate.
Uncertainty of the outcome.
Uncertainty of outcomes. Oh yeah, ambiguity. Yes.
Is there actually interest before you have experience with it?
Ah, is the interest there to begin with? Yeah. Yes.
Definitions. I mean, what is design
Yeah.
versus innovation
Yeah.
versus
What are we even talking
Lean
about?
Sigma? How does
Yeah.
it differ from all
How do
that?
people think about design thinking in the context of everything else? Yeah.
How to measure impact.
How to measure impact. Good.
Scalability, it's one thing to do with a cohort, but can we do it in the whole school?
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Scalability. Yes.
Having a personality type that lends itself to thinking these types
Oh,
of
interesting.
ways.
Yeah, is there a personality type that works better? Yeah.
This is sort of related. Predominance of rote learning goes against nurturing creativity.
Oh, interesting. Predominance of rote learning is antithetical to nurture creativity. Anything else? Yes.
Academics tend to make decisions based on history.
Ah, interesting. In academia, you make decisions based on history and precedent. Anything else? Yes.
They don't even see that a lack of creativity exists.
Oh, they don't see that. Yes.
So academics make decisions on history and precedent, also on data. So if you don't show them, where's the paper showing that design thinking works?
Yeah. So similar like the impact of the data of that. Yeah. Yes.
Naming the barriers is a barrier.
Naming the barriers is a barrier. Yeah. Yeah. Seeing the actual problem.
No standard curriculum for this.
No standard curriculum for this.
And not an accreditation standard.
Not an accreditation standard. If you call now, I'll throw in a copy. Anything else? Okay, great. Yeah, yes.
Geographic and mental fragmentation of the stakeholders. They're not on the same page literally and in the same place.
The literal and figurative, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Are they co-located mentally?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, great. So we'll leave this up as well, so feel free to peruse that or photograph that. Again, I think that this question and this question over here, why does healthcare need design and what is preventing it from being incorporated into medical education, are like really good starting points. And we don't have the answers to those, like the one answer that fits all programs, A, because I don't really think that exists, and B, because it's only been a few years that people have been experimenting in this way. But this is something that all of us are aware of as we make the case for change at our various institutions or organizations and actually try to incorporate it into the way that we are working. So hopefully you've learned some things from the people you've talked to, maybe got an ally or someone else that you can kind of call up and say, how are you dealing with this now? Or maybe someone across the room you want to meet. But we're going to transition now to hear from Matt and some of his experiences and experiments at UVA. And you also hear maybe some of the barriers that he encountered and how he overcame them or...
Yeah, well, yes, it's a positive. This is a positive story I'm about to tell you, but I chose to thinking about this section of the session. I am trying to explicitly talk to you guys about my my story of trying to, take, if you hopefully maybe at this part of the session, have at least, if you came in already a zealot about design thinking and its place in healthcare, great. If you were on the fence, or even if you're a bit skeptical, maybe at this point you at least somewhat know what it is, the kinds of things you're trying to engender. And I'm going to tell you my story about trying to get this, and happily getting this started at a small, I'm at an earlier stage than even Bon is at the UVA, but I tell you a little bit about how I tried to address some of these issues. And some of the things that I dealt with are you guys generated. And so I think all these things were relevant to me as I told you a little bit about my story, but kind of like, you heard from Bon, one story of how these things get started at schools is you have a leader, like a dean, say, I just like to do this, or the school has decided to distinguish itself by radically changing its curriculum. In my case, that wasn't happening. No one was saying, we need design thinking at UVA. It was me saying, having a personal interest and sensing around the university that there were a lot of people doing stuff and that there was a bubbling interest, but no one had stood up and done it in the medical school. And no one even, to your point, no one even thought it was a problem. It wasn't like they were like, yeah, we really need this. And my itch that I was trying to scratch was basically like Bon, this had become a really valuable, I had kind of realized that I approach, as I said in my little intro comments, I approach problems very differently than a lot of my clinical colleagues. And I felt that I was starting to be honest, as a teacher thinking about my students, I'm starting to be rewarded for that type of thinking, like in terms of like even grant making and things. I think this is the future of where progress is going. And looking at the curriculum, we weren't preparing the students to think in this way. And like Bon, I had no idea what design thinking was. I actually, but my own research is actually on the built environment. I think I do a lot of research on how do we design cities, buildings, transportation systems to promote health. So I work with designers a lot, and I was just musing about what is this, well, how do I think? And I had a designer friend kind of be like, oh, that's so cute, you don't know. You're a design thinker. And I was like, I am, I don't know what that is. And then kind of, I liked the keynote yesterday a lot. What I basically started was, how do I get more deliberate about being a design thinker and so forth. So my challenge was, how do I take this personal epiphany, at a place where it's not being asked for yet, and how do I actually make an argument to get something started at UVA with zero budget? Was really also my starting point. And the first thing I did was I came out of the gate using my personal capital and network and saying, we should do design thinking at UVA. And the reaction was like, Matt, God, please, not another one of your ideas. I'm that kind of guy at UVA. But I'll tell you what ended up working for me. Let me unpack it for you. I basically started, I had a rethink, and I started a personal experiment. I was like, okay, going in through the front door saying design thinking at a place that's not asking for it, that didn't work. So what am I going to do? Well, I think I have to stop talking about design thinking and see what happens there and give myself that challenge. I said, apparently I can't use that word, or the frame isn't working for some reason. So let me tell you the argument that I have started to make that has really started to work for me, okay? So basically, instead of coming in the door and saying, let's do design thinking at UVA, what I come in now, whenever I talk about this now, what I actually say is, first thing out of my mouth is, the grand challenges of healthcare are fundamentally changing. And everybody's like, so and then I give them there's no shortage of examples. The ones I like to use are, hey, the fundamental, like there's a sudden new abundance of personal health data that have never existed before, in overwhelming amounts. We have no idea how to deal with as physicians, like all the types of health data that are being generated. Disruptive discoveries, like who the heck knows what the microbiome or genomics are going to mean for the practice of medicine, healthcare, and really, very particularly, what is the role of the physician in that thing? And I can't help but a side comment. Something that I've really come to realize is like when you really stand back from how we train doctors, it's still based around this fundamental assumption that the only healthcare data that are produced occur during a physical exam. We still train everyone like that. And so realizing when you say things like that, you say like, that's not true anymore. Like, people are coming in with truckloads of their own personal data. We're no longer even like the source of data, not even so much interpretation. And then finally, I always bring up systems issues. Like, if you were to ask any health expert, public health expert or something, about the top problems in our world, to Bond's point, they're homelessness, gun violence, childhood obesity. These are systems issues. They are not going to be solved through vaccines. And again, every one of these I have found, you haven't said design thinking yet. You're just like, these are the issues we're facing, and this is important. And then you're like, okay, great. So we're all on the same page. Something's up. And then you basically say, well, what are those competencies we just described? Like, if you wanted to set up physicians to be able to deal with that, what you're really saying is we need to help them manage change, like be able to be adaptive. We need them to be creative. We need them to be able to lead innovation teams, be part of innovation teams to address these things we can't even tell about yet. We need them to feel empowered with a sense that they have actually some sort of a structured approach in their pocket to like get started. Like, so they're not just, they've been trained in the physical exam approach. We should also they should feel like they have a way of dealing with these crazy changes that are occurring. And again, that's good. And then you're like, and then you hit them. Now, can we all agree that medical education has not kept pace? Absolutely. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, well, I got an idea for you. I've been looking around the internet, everybody, and apparently there's this thing called design thinking. And whoa, wait a minute, Matt, I thought it. And I said, no, look, Harvard Business Review. And they're not even talking about, the title of this is not even, design thinking is so cool. It's design, in business, they're looking back on 10 years of using design thinking. I'm like, there's a pedagogy out there. In fact, guys, it's actually being taught at our own business school, and there's whole scholarship around it. People their professors doing design thinking research. They're charging a lot of money for executive education things, and that's what you do. Like, they're charging a lot of money for executive education. So then suddenly you're like, actually thinking about it this way, it's actually kind of weird that healthcare hasn't done design thinking. And everybody's like, it's kind of true. I haven't really thought about that. And suddenly you're in a very different conversation. Suddenly then I'm kind of like, so I think actually what is ahead of us as a challenge here at UVA is how might we, and they don't even know that I just throw how might we at them. How might we actually go about integrating human-centered design or design thinking into medical education here at UVA? And hey guys, we have an opportunity to be a leader, and maybe we can actually inform that national conversation. And that's usually when I say, by the way, I'm not the only crazy person saying this. There's this guy named Bond and David, because they're all this too. So that really, I really suggest that as like, that's been my story, and it's really worked, okay? Once I had that story better refined, and I had a tiny little flame of political capital, what happened next was I got about a $30,000 grant from the curriculum committee to give it a shot, okay? And more importantly, they had no idea how innovative they were being. They gave me the right to include an introduction email that went out to the incoming first-year med students. And in prototyping form, like I got inspired to do this by Dennis Boyle when I came to the first med ed, and he was basically like, just start. Don't worry about it. Like somebody over there was saying lack of stake, experts, and are you a designer, and did you bring in David Janka and stuff like that? I didn't even know David at that point, and certainly didn't have the money to pay him to come out. So I was basically like, nope, let's just start. I called myself a design thinker, and I wrote up an email, and the cool part is 15 med students said, yeah, that sounds awesome. And actually, it's an even better story than that. What I quickly realized was that I sent out a cold call email to the incoming 130 first-year med students. The interesting part was 50 of them responded back that they'd be interested in learning more. That really got my interest. It also really got the curriculum committee's interest. And then 40 of them showed up for the actual information session. All right, and when you talk to them, this young woman, these kids showing up in med school are incredible these days, right? I mean, she had a whole career at Deloitte doing healthcare consulting. She's a much better design thinker than I am in terms of using this framework. So Cassandra, I remember her explicitly saying, actually, it was really disorienting me to apply to medical school because I've been trained, all my undergrad was use design thinking as a frame, and then I worked in design thinking, and now here I am coming to this intense experience, and I don't see it anywhere. And I'm really, so I suddenly had this realization of, at this moment that I thought I was at peak innovation, I realized how far behind we actually were from the students. And I think that's something, packaging that carefully and sending that back up to the education leadership at your university, also, in my experience, has found if you just lead with the students, they always help you out. So the fun part was, I actually explicitly told the students that they were co-designing this first, like I still do that. It's a contract that I do with them. I'm like, hey guys, I'm making this stuff up, okay? I'm just telling you that I have a plan, but it's probably gonna change, and I need you guys are gonna be co-designing it with me. And that gets around some of the students, because med students are a particular breed. I mean, they're extremely time constrained, and so ergo very time sensitive. And they will sniff out whether they think something is valuable or not and tell you about it very, very fast. So you have to get in. I've also found it's very important to get them to say, are you in on an experiment that's mostly going to be about like a longer term development? Are you in? And don't keep hanging out around with this if you're not in on that experiment with me. And I also engender this idea of like, we're doing this for your students that are follow you maybe 4 or 5 years from now. That's what we're really focused on. And they say yes to that. So one of the things, so what we did with this first class is we just took on current like topics that were important to the hospital system. We talked about inpatient falls. We talked about high utilizer patients with frequent readmissions, and they got interacted with the senior leadership who were responsible for these things. They loved it, and to be honest, they generated some really fascinating insights as well. And the cool part was that had just enough success that I was able to get a slightly larger grant from the UVA Alumni Association. You can see the theme here. You guys, not quite ready for my HRSA grant yet, but we're getting there. And so now with the second year, which we're in now, we've been focusing on improving the ER patient experience. So
just a time update of 10 minutes.
Great, and I think that would be perfect. So the other thing you guys brought up was, okay, fine. How do you take this into the larger? How do you make this mainstream? Is one way of saying it. And that's the personal experiment that I put to myself right now. And I don't know how, this one is just like, this is early stage. But I did feel like this doesn't really count. It also is hard to, I'm also slightly different than Bon, and again, I have a full research agenda. Like my day job is not really this, but this is turning into a thing. But I'm trying to figure out how do I make this actually a sustainable part of an academic portfolio for me. And so for me, what I decided was success, not just for me, but for this thing, is when I figured out how to make this make sense as something that should be taught to the entire medical school. Again, I stuck with first thing, don't talk about design thinking. So what instead happened was I got an opportunity to, because of the success of the program, starting to generate interest. What happened next, and I suspect this might happen for you too, is someone from the inside of the hospital leadership kind of tentatively raised their hand and said, took a risk on my behalf and said, hey Matt, we have an hour in the second year curriculum for the entire med school where we've said that we're supposed to be doing an approach to complex problems, and we have no idea what to teach them. Right. And they were like, we're wondering whether this design thinking lens you have might work. And they're like, okay, well, give me the details. Like, well, you need to teach the entire second year class, like 160 students, and for an hour and a half in about 2 weeks from now. And the answer, of course, was like, that's impossible. But what I said was, of course, like, fantastic. This is great. And I knew, of course, that it was intense. So what ended up happening was and yes, I am intimidated. These are jaded second year UVA med students, and I've just shown up to do design thinking. What I actually decided to do was take on a very skill-based rationale to them. So what I decided to do was really explicitly focus on, hey, you guys are about to go onto the wards. you've been taught one style of interview technique that's very focused on starting from a broad differential diagnosis and getting to narrow. Today what we're going to work on is a different skill set in your interviews. We're going to talk about an empathy-based interview technique that would be really helpful for to kind of uncover latent information from from patients on your team. And basically I made them this promise that design thinking will get you an A on your clerkship. And then this was actually the first slide I made when I made that, and because I was like, if this slide isn't true, I'm dead. You know, like, because that's all they care about is like how to differentiate. And the key, so the argument I made to the students was this one: hey guys, why do I think you might get it? Why do I think an A is possible if you do design thinking? Well, for up to this point, your job in this first 2 years has been information processing. That's how you differentiate yourself as a student. FYI, the rest of your career is going to be collecting patient stories, discovering information, and therefore discovering information to improve patient care, I promise you, is going to be the new differentiator on your clerkship, and more importantly, for the rest of your careers. It resonated with the expected distribution of students, you know, on their reviews, but it worked. They were enough that they were into it. And basically what I said was, and then that's the first time I mentioned design thinking, where I was basically like, oh, and we're going to use this frame called design thinking, which focuses on uncovering latent stories and desires. And what I did was a blatant kind of copy and modification of the D-School gift-giving experience, but instead we focused on care pack, like the experience of giving a care package. And basically I made my own modification of kind of like these structured packets that had very structured time zones. How to teach that scale was a totally new experience for me, and it was also, and then basically this is what it looked like. I've done this once, but you know, the students loved it. I mean, and it was a fantastic experience, and we weren't able to do physical prototypes, but we were able to push them, you know, to do at least like drawing ideas and getting things out. So what I tried to do was slowly, gently kind of point out, like, okay, we're doing this right now, and then it would show them in a larger context, in a design firm or something, or a large issue. At this point, we would be doing prototyping, which would be doing this. And again, the expected distribution of students, the zealots loved it. Really, the people I was most interested in was the mainstream students who maybe had slightly heard of it or had never heard of it. You know, all I know is that I had about 15 inquiries afterward from more that weren't in my program, wanting to do like a 4th-year research elective with me or something. I took that, and then I had the expected 15% that were the gunners who were like, I have no idea how this is going to help me on the boards. You know? and I don't know how, and that's actually my remaining challenge, and I think anyone's challenge is I don't have a good answer for them. They're right. And so to the extent that the medical school has the confidence to let me keep doing this while we figure out, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
15 post-lecture is a win.
No, yeah, well, 15%, you know, I mean, you're right, but they're loud and they're very good at writing critiques, so the tricky part. But it was, I mean, the fun part is these are UVA med students who have never done this before, learning, really drawing out ideas and having a great time. So, thanks. I hope that's helped. That's been my experience so far.
So yeah, so just to close, we have about 10 more minutes for Q&A, and these were just a few of the kind of tips we talked about for getting started, but I'll let you two run the room.
Yes. I'm looking at this, I think, for the first time. Right? Okay. Well,
as a transition, I mean, are there any just like immediate reactions? I mean, so like, does that resonate with things that you guys have heard and stuff like that? Yeah. All right. Well, I mean,
is that it's fascinating as a non-medical student, clinician, as a patient. I'm wondering if there's a way that patients can help to drive that.
Yes.
And to elicit that, like show up with that desire to have those interactions with healthcare providers that can then fold back in to become a requirement in medical education.
Sure, and I think it's so easy with this framework because it's all on empathy building with the end user. So it's almost impossible to run an exercise or a curriculum or a program without engaging with patients. Like one couple of classes that we did was, you know, how do we improve access to acute care delivery, so when patients go to the emergency department. So part of the exercise that we did was we just sent students, first-year medical students, literally on the streets of Philadelphia, and just started talking to people and just go, hey, what happens when you get sick? Where do you end up going? And just started getting stories from people on the street and to build empathy that way. So I think it naturally lends itself to working with patients.
And if I could just add to that, I think there's like what should be, which is kind of one part of our workshop. So of course patients should be involved. And I hope you understand I'm fully invested in that too. I was trying to represent the how do you, and I do actually think, as I said, students can really help you gain political capital. Patients also are just, if somebody sees one interaction where you see first-year med students interacting within the first month of medical school with patients and having a truly empathetic, like learning how to have something, you've just made a huge, it helps a lot.
Back there and here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a comment and then a response to something, to your conundrum. So one is, you're always going to have, the early adopters. So Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm, right? So there's always going to be the early adopters, the innovators and the early adopters, and and so you're going to see that curve. So it's very, first of all, what you're doing, which the results you're seeing, I believe, are very natural. But if the outcomes come out, both from qualitative and quantitative, then you should see, progressive adoption as you go along, and then all you got left are the laggards, and that's actually part of the model, and it's a natural part of the model. So, so nothing out of the ordinary from what I can tell so far. To your point about the 15% who are the gunners, as the guy that writes the board books, and also
can you say your name and what you do?
My name is Val Lee. I write a book called First Aid for the U.S. Step 1. It's used by most medical students, and they freak out about this, and they literally just sleep with my book and shower with my book and all that stuff, and then they put it on Twitter. They do. There are all kinds of, anyway, we can go on. But the point is, I also have to teach these medical students. I'm also a faculty, and I also take care of patients as well too. And I say, look, at the end of the day, what really matters, what matters, your patients, and the residency directors know that too. So guess what? The USME Step 1 matters no more after the second year. It only gets you in for your interview, but to actually land that spot, you actually have to show that you have success with patients. And so, so that's where things like design thinking can help, bridge how you work with patients and those outcomes.